Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of The Apartment Department, a podcast for multifamily marketers by multifamily marketers. Today, we're going to talk about something really exciting, and it's the idea of measuring the success of flat rate ILSs. So what key performance indicators do we use to measure the performance of flat rate ILSs and the importance of the ILSs in both the renter journey and also in the marketing mix. So this is something that both Chris and I are very passionate about. We talk a lot about KPIs and making sure that our properties are using the right marketing mixes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris to kind of start talking to all of us about what flat rate ILSs are, some of the advantages and challenges, and then we'll dive into a KPI discussion.
Thanks, Ann. Great to be here as always. So I think we should start by defining what a flat rate ILS is for those that may be new to the industry. Basically, when we talk about a flat rate ILS, we're talking about an internet listing service. So one of those services that goes out to the internet and syndicates our rents, our photos, helps people find our apartments. And so there are some big ones out there. Rent.com, apartments.com would be flat rate ILSs. We also have pay per lease, PPL ILSs, which are Zillow, Apartment List, some of the other internet listing services that help get our name out there, but we don't pay a flat monthly fee. We just pay for a lease. So I think that is going to be an important part of our discussion today, because we want to look at the differences in what ILSs we have access to, what a lot of people in our industry are doing, and then what Ann and I are doing using our KPI metrics and actually digging into where people come from. So I think this all came up last year during one of our discussions. It was, how much money are we spending on our budgets? We don't have unlimited budgets in our industry. I think we all know that. But we need to advertise, right? And we want to get smarter about where we're advertising and how we're advertising. And I don't think either of us have ever looked at our advertising and just set it and leave it and haven't monitored it ongoing. So when you take that in mind, and we're talking about what's working and what isn't, or how much money we're spending and how much those leases are actually costing us, the flat rate ILS discussion comes up all the time, because you're paying a flat monthly rate and sometimes it can be expensive. So that's kind of the introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. I would say the advantages of all of our ILSs are the SEO. I mean, they spend a lot of money. Yes, to get their information out there. And so obviously Google's still 90% market share, and people use Google. That's how they find us. And those ILSs definitely help us. So it has to be part of your strategy in some way. The disadvantage, of course, is the cost on some of them, right? So you're just spending blindly and you're in a contract for a long time, whether it works or not, whether you can prove it works or not, you're still going to have to pay that monthly fee. And for some properties, when they're smaller in different markets, that's a big chunk to pay, depending on what that market is. I'm in Dallas, so we're competing with a lot of people in Dallas. It can get expensive. If you're in New York, same thing. If you're in a smaller community or a smaller market, maybe you have a little bit more flexibility. So let's start there, Ann, and why don't you give your input on the ILSs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, Chris, I started in multifamily about 4 years ago, and actually, so when I started, the concept of a flat rate ILS was actually kind of foreign to me. And I grew up marketing in the world of pay-per-click, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, where you can turn them on and off. Although you have that upfront setup time, you can turn them on and off pretty quickly. And so the idea of having a contract for multiple months for something that didn't really take into account seasonality and some other things that I was used to was very interesting. And so it was really a good exercise for me to, that was one of my goals then, was to dive into these marketing sources and understand, well, how are they performing for our properties, because we are locked into these contracts. And so that's been a really fun journey. I think you're right. The advantages are huge. There is so much exposure that you get from an ILS. They do a great job, both from an organic as well as a pay-per-click standpoint. And I would say, too, a lot of these groups do a really great job of branding themselves. And so some of their names are synonymous with searching for an apartment and finding an apartment. And so I think the other thing is they do a really great job of optimizing listings. There is so much data available about what amenities people are looking for, kind of what rent thresholds they're looking for, how to segment geographies based on DMAs or zip codes or whatever the case may be. And so the ILSs are constantly optimizing how people are interacting. One, how people are getting to their site, and then two, how people are interacting with their listings, how potential renters are interacting with their listings. And so from that standpoint, there is a huge advantage. They're driving people to their site, and then they're optimizing them as much as possible in order to get the property leads. And so I do love that about the ILSs that we use.
One of the challenges, even with our technology today and cookies and how tracking has gotten so much better over the last just 5 years, maybe 10 years for sure, figuring out where our traffic is coming from is always a struggle, even with the technology that we have, even with the tracking that our partners are using and we're using. And so that's where our KPIs really come into play and digging into the data. Which ones are you using to determine what's working and what isn't? And are you using a straight, first visit, last visit? Are you using a journey type?
Sure. So a couple things. One, we always use the data in our CRM. We have tracking phone numbers and email addresses in all of our listings and all of our ILS listings, and in fact, all of our digital marketing sources. And so we trust that that is our data truth, right, is our CRM. And so I would say from an overall performance standpoint, I do look at cost per lease and then conversion rate from lead to lease. But another metric that I've adopted lately is actually kind of an optimization metric. And so I've started pulling data straight from the ILSs, and I'll look at the basically detail page view to lead conversion rate. And so I can compare all of my listings to each other, take an average page detail view to lead conversion ratio, and then determine which one of my listings are underperforming and may need to be optimized. So that's something I don't think you and I have talked about, but that's something that we've added in recently.
Yeah, that's really good. I've always taken first stop as my kind of my,
the attribution. How
the
you're tracking.
But I also look at the journey and see where they're being touched and how people are finding us and how they're interacting with us, similar to what you're doing, using our CRM and looking at their page views. But I think what I've come to realize is it's part of my marketing strategy. I can't have too many flat rate ILSs. And I kind of have to choose between what I'm actually going to be spending on. If I'm going to spend a flat rate, who am I going to use versus the pay per lease? I mean, my pay per lease numbers are great. I've had my cost per lease in the $300 to $600 range, depending on which one I'm doing and if I'm spending more money or not. And that's a pretty good cost per lease for me. I'm happy anything under a month, especially if right now we're offering concessions, right? They're back, occupancies are a little bit softer. And so for me, I'm really diving into those numbers and seeing how I can optimize those listings, spend a little bit more, maybe on a lift program or doing something else with a different partner to get more impressions, and pulling back on some of the flat rate ILSs where it is so much harder to track. I mean, even when you do a lease match, I'm not always confident in that data. I have to go back and double check it to see what's actually happening.
Yeah, we've found that too, that we have a discrepancy in the number of leads that are reported by flat rate ILSs in their platform versus our CRM. And so that was always a concern for me. Well, where are these falling off? Recently, I did something where I pulled lead data from an ILS and compared it with our CRM data. And once I kind of deduped the leads from the flat rate ILS and then took out some of the leads that our team had marked as unqualified, the numbers actually matched up a little bit better. So that made me feel more comfortable that we weren't necessarily miscounting leads in our CRM. So that was good, but then that data discrepancy exists, and it can be concerning, and then it leads to discussions between the management company and the ILSs of well, you guys aren't accounting for everything that we're doing for you. But again, we have to trust our source of truth, which, I think in both of our cases is that CRM platform.
I would say another challenge that we've talked about a lot is that the ILSs aren't adapting as fast as maybe we are. Our industry has typically been a slow industry to adopt technology, but I think we're there now. I think most people are adapting this new technology and marketing differently. And I just don't know if the ILSs are doing the same thing. Our listings seem a little bit archaic. Just even the attribution piece is pretty hard, given the fact that you can be pretty accurate on some of your other marketing sources. Even social has gotten a lot better, right? And you can really see one-to-one almost, or even on PPC ads. So what's your feeling on that and where the ILSs are going compared to where the rest of us are going?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lag behind in some cases in flexibility of terms. And I think pricing structure, like we talked about market by market. I mean, we have some markets where, so we do the same thing that you do. We basically say, if we can get a lease at, if our cost per lease is an average of 1 month's rent or lower at a certain property, then regardless of conversion rate or whatever else, then that marketing source is working and it's beneficial to us. And so, but we are finding that it's sometimes not feasible. And I think the flexibility to me really, really does feel kind of archaic and like it's not moving as quickly as some of the other partners that we might use to drive traffic for our properties. And I think the other thing that's interesting to me is you lose that data too. You kind of lose that first party. This isn't, I just thought about this, but we're losing the opportunity to kind of remarket to people when they're going through an ILS. Whereas if, some other marketing sources, you're driving traffic straight to your website and then you get to control that experience once more. You also then kind of own that data for the prospects and you can do what you want with it from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I agree with you. It becomes dangerous when you're relying on other platforms, especially when you're not seeing the performance and you're being asked to sign a 6 or 12-month contract, or you're asked to increase the package because the package you're at isn't getting the exposure you need. And that's why you're not meeting performance goals. And it's like, well, I can't justify spending more money in the hope that I'm going to get more impressions, in the hope that I'm going to get more leads, in the hope that all of a sudden then my cost per lease goal is going to match what I need it to be. So there's definitely a disconnect between how we're marketing and how we're trying to follow seasonality trends, performance trends, and how the product is being offered to us.
So I'll step back and we'll get a little bit in the weeds and talk about a case study that I'm doing and what it's actually leading to this year. We just got through budgets. So I looked at this very hard over the last year. We got our tracking in place and we were looking at where we're spending our money and how effective we are in spending our money and how can we be more efficient so that we can take advantage of new technologies that come out and have a little bit of leeway within the budgets. And what I found was I'm using both flat rate ILSs. I inherited that when I came on board. So I had a good test. It was apples to apples. And I added a couple of pay-per-lease programs with other ILSs. And I looked at it and my return on investment on my pay-per-leases is just so much better. And what it led me to believe was, especially if I'm in apartment row and I have 9 other competitors and they're spending money, people are going to come out, they're going to look at all of us regardless. We don't all need to be on the same platforms. And so I am focusing in on the platforms that my competitors aren't. And what that has done is created 270 leases on one, almost 300 on another. And if I spend a little bit more money, I could probably increase that. And it's led me to believe that, hey, I'm going to go down to one ILS this year, and I'm going to see what happens. And quite frankly, we've already done it at a couple of properties and we're not struggling. And so at the end of the day, I think what's happening is we're looking at the data. I'm looking at my cost per lease. I'm looking at my traffic. I'm looking at what my teams are telling me on site because we're communicating all the time. And what I'm finding is it's okay. It's okay to take a chance and be different and just see what happens. I can always add it back. I don't think any of our advertising partners are going to tell me I can't come back if I want to do a test. And so this year, I am going to test just using one flat rate ILS and and more pay-per lease and more PPC, and I'm going to do a less expensive flat rate ILS, because that way if I do get leases from it, I'm going to get that ROI, and I'm not just going to spend money with the name brand because everybody else is doing it or because they're doing a lot of marketing on their own. We're looking at this individually for our properties and what's working best for us, and it's okay to be different. And so that's what's exciting for me this year, is I'm going to try it and see what happens. And there might be a point next year when I say I don't need any flat rate ILS, because we have enough other marketing efforts going on, and we've gotten dialed in on doing email or PPC or doing marketplace on site or whatever it is, and really trying some of these other, more cost-effective options to see what happens. And that's the test that we're doing. I'm ripping the Band-Aid off in a couple of months, and it's going to be exciting to see what happens.
I love that. And I think, I'm so excited to see what happens too. And we do that very much on a case-by-case basis right now. We evaluate our flat rate ILSs on a 6-month basis. And we have, based on our cost per lease goal, have been able to either add or take away based on performance. But I think you're right. There are so many other opportunities. I mean, if you're saving $2,000 a month at a property and you were going to have a 12-month contract and all of a sudden you're saving $24,000, I mean, think about what you can do. You can increase your resident referral rate. Guess what? Resident referrals are like a 30 or 40% lead to lease conversion as opposed to like a 3%. And so you can increase resident referrals and probably still save money. You can get all of your residents gifts and probably still save money, and then you're increasing your renewal rates. Okay, so all of a sudden you have 10% more people staying because you treated them really well. And so I think it gives you so much more flexibility, not only to put into other marketing channels, but also to rethink how you're interacting with your residents and just, I don't know, that's what's exciting to me, is that all of a sudden you're doing something different. You have flexibility. You're allowed to be creative in the sense of, we talk a lot about going back to basics. Like, let's go back to those things that maybe we've let slip by the wayside because we were so focused on, well, if we market, we'll get leads in and we don't have to do, the fundamentals. And so I'm excited to track how this goes with you throughout the year. And you're right. You have such good communication with your teams. You guys are going to find a smarter, better way together to spend that money.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just putting the money somewhere else. It's not that we're not going to spend the money. It's just we're going to put it somewhere else. And one thing when we look at these ILSs that we probably should have mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, depending on what level you're at, you may be on page 2 or 3. Yeah. Anyway, even if you're at one of the higher levels, you still may not make front page. And if you are on front page, you are spending a lot for it. So you better be able to close those leads, and your team better be able to do that. And I don't think that's realistic to think that every lead that's coming off that, that they have to convert. It's just not going to happen, right? We're happy with a 33% conversion rate on site. At least we are. That's the metric we aim to get to for our leasing consultants. And if we end up having to spend $2,000 or $3,000 a month to get into the top 10, that's a lot of money. You have to get multiple leases to be able to pay for that. Forget about breaking even. So that's where I'm looking at it. I mean, if I'm paying less and I'm paying $1,500 a month, I'm on page 4 anyway. So how many people are scrolling page 4?
You're not. And even if you're paying top for page 1, you then are competing from a price and amenity standpoint. And if you can't compete on those things, I mean, people are price shopping on those platforms. And so if you think, oh, well, I can make up for my advertising spend by increasing my rent per month by $200 a month, people aren't going to click on you anyway. They're just going to bypass you. And so you still have to be competitive from a reputation standpoint, an amenity standpoint, a pricing standpoint, even if you are getting that visibility.
Yeah, I totally agree. It'll be a fun experiment to see what happens this year. Like I said, we've already tested it at a few. I know you've tested it at a few, and we haven't seen a fall off, which leads me to believe that we're going down the right path, and I'm going to be optimistic about it. But I do know that there's people that I've talked to and shared when I was doing offline, and they think I'm crazy. So we'll see what happens. We'll let the data tell the story. And of course, if I'm wrong, say that I was wrong, and we'll flip the script, because we definitely want to keep our properties healthy and keep people coming in. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up today?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like I said, I just think you're doing the right thing. It's our responsibility as marketers to have key performance indicators and then make decisions on what marketing sources we're using based on those key performance indicators, but also flexibility and making sure that we're not automatically committing money that may or may not be well spent kind of in a 6 or 12 month option. I don't know. It's important. So I'm excited for you. I'm glad that we got to talk about this. I know it's something that we're both really passionate about. And I hope as we run into other marketers out and about that they, kind of, like you said, you've talked to some people and they agree with you and some disagree with you. So I'm excited that we can at least have this conversation with folks. So that being said, I think some of our key takeaways from this discussion, again, have KPIs, have key performance indicators for all of your marketing sources, including flat rate ILSs. Don't be afraid to own your data and analyze it and make decisions that work best for your properties, regardless of if it's going against the norm or not. And are there any other key takeaways that you want to throw in there?
I think it's okay to go against the grain sometimes. And that's one of the key takeaways. I think it's okay to be different and try something that your competitors aren't doing. And when you look at the data, sometimes you can find those holes. And, we can talk about maybe some of the PPL pay-per lease programs that are out there. We have a couple. There's one in particular that's working really well for me. And I think it's because my competitors and my product aren't using it because they don't think their demographic is using that platform, but they are. And so owning your data, as you said, is the biggest piece of all of this. The reason why me and you are able to make those decisions and cut some of these other, let's say, legacy advertising platforms is because we have the data in front of us and we're looking at it and analyzing it. And so I think if our industry can get smarter and we can do this together, it'll help us. It'll all help us be better and help us, be found out there. I'll leave this, with this stat. Apartment searches are down overall a lot. I got some stats recently that just show that people are not searching for apartments right now. Our demand is a lot lower than it was just 8 months ago compared to the supply. And so we're all out there we're all fighting for the same prospects. And so we have to be different and we have to try a different approach. And I'm all for spending money when it makes sense, but I also want to be conscious of ownership and being able to spend the money the right way and be more efficient. And so that's what this whole discussion was about today, is trying to be more efficient, trying to figure out what's actually working and what isn't. And it's okay to take a risk here and there if your data allows you to.
Yep. No, absolutely. I agree. And so I think the other thing that we wanted to do is, so we mentioned this is our second episode ever. And so we definitely want to invite people to, as they're listening to us, to share their thoughts, experiences. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we're excited. We're excited to be in front of everyone. Chris and I and another one of our industry friends will actually be presenting at the AIM conference in May. So that's a really huge opportunity for us to meet some other folks. And if you have listened to this and want to catch up with us, we will be there. We're speaking Wednesday morning. So with that, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you.